Refo could not help himself, as a tear did form beneath his right eye as they set to light the pyre atop which his friend, no, his brother in friendship, Jorgen, did rest. Refo had already made up his mind he would not watch as he burned. No, he could not bear the sight of it, but what he could bear was the thought of killing those. But before he could finish his thought, Grandon, who knew that he was to take great care of Refo should Refo's father have anything to do with his business, had already rested his hand upon his shoulder and, towering over him, said to him quietly, "If you want to kill them, leave that to us." Refo only nodded, supposing that if anyone could kill such creatures, it would be him, the mammoth of a man. But if Grandon had killed Refo's mother, then Refo wanted to kill him first primarily, but given that Jorgen was now dead because of those beasts which had yet been explained to him, Refo supposed that he must trust Grandon as much as he could. Easily enough, Refo found it that he should calm himself in the wake of such tragedy, but his underlying anger, and it had always existed in him, was now, in this moment, unparalleled. Somehow it did not matter how he felt, however, as there was nothing now that he could do. So what he did do was inform Grandon that there was a carriage that brought him to the forest, and that it waited for him if it were still there, if those things did not destroy it. And Grandon, to Refo's relief, assured him that it had not, as they did not, for whatever reason, leave the edges of the forest ever, as far as he knew. And to Refo, Grandon did seem to know. As Refo walked away alongside Grandon, as Jorgen burned, the smell of it seeping into the coming night air, Grandon told Refo that he must wait until morning, and that if the carriage were not there, he would send some men to escort him back home. They had horses, after all, a few of them, on the outskirts, he said, somewhere. They could not bring them into the forest, as they were all killed very easily by the beasts, which they called darklings, simply because the forest was a dark place, and they were the spawns of such a place, or surely they were, as Grandon supposed. "How do you kill them?" Refo asked on their way back to the carriage, obviously nervous of them. "Fire," Grandon said, "and lots of bullets." "What about swords?" Refo asked. "If you want to risk it," Grandon said, "but even I would not." Refo nodded, remembering the strength of the womanly darkling which he'd encountered. He told Grandon of her, and without surprise he nodded. "She is a demon, absolutely," he assured Refo. "Of course I have not been able to down her." "Neither was I able," Refo said, putting his head down to look solemnly at the dirt beneath his feet. Grandon put his hand on Refo's shoulder, and at first Refo could not tell if it were out of obligation or not, but then with the look in Grandon's eye as if he understood the loss that Refo had just undergone, he decided to trust that it was not obligatory, the reason as to why he tried to confront him so, and he said, "Neither have any of us." Refo nodded again, solemnly. "Thank you, Grandon." "Sure," he said with a nod, returning his large hand to his side. "Refo," he also said, "tell me, why is it that you came to the western forest?" Refo shrugged. "To see what you were doing out here, Grandon." Refo lied somewhat. Grandon nodded. "Did I seem that badly in disrepair at the dinner?" "No," said Refo. "I figured it was your age, to be honest." Grandon laughed at that. "Let's get you home, Refo." They walked on a bit further, only just a small way away from the carriage, but then again, Refo heard something, shouting. "What is that?" Refo turned to Grandon, who had yet noticed, though once he did, he turned his head to look and shouted to Refo to run. "Make it to the edge of the forest," he yelled, sprinting and grabbing hold of Refo's arm, dragging him along with him. Refo, obviously startled, had no choice but to keep up, and by the time they reached the edge of the forest, some of the men, Refo could tell from their cries, had already been felled, though the rest, say 5 or 6 out of 11 or so, had survived. Grandon spotted the carriage quickly, ran Refo to it, placed him inside, shut the door, and shouted to his startled driver and horses to leave. It was getting dark, and as one could hear the screams of some of the men yet dead, so too could Refo and the carriage driver, who left in a hurry. Refo, looking through a window in the back of the carriage, watched Grandon as he drew 2 pistols from beneath his overcoat and cocked them. Refo looked away and tried to breathe. Grandon would die, surely, he thought, remembering his experience with the 2 darklings that he had encountered. Or perhaps not, he rethought. Grandon was large, Grandon was very strong, and surely if he'd survived this long, he'd survive this. Though Refo wasn't entirely sure that that's what he wanted. For whatever reason, he still suspected Grandon of his mother's death, and it made sense that Grandon would have killed his mother in order to disrupt the family. In the chaos, whatever that chaos would look like, he could take advantage, but Refo's appearance in the forest, surely Grandon would have taken advantage then, he thought, though he had not. Perhaps that's why, as Refo and his carriage teetered and tottered away onto the bumpy road that was still in eyeshot of the forest, perhaps that is why Refo hoped so badly that he would not die, and because of the kindness he had shown him after the death of his good friend. Refo could not think of it now, and his thoughts racing, he rolled back his eyes and fell unconscious in his seat. It was not until they were nearly arrived in the city that Refo awoke to the driver, who prodded him with a great black stick, the one which he used to beat the horses when they were too tired to stay hurried. Though Refo was not a horse, in a small fit of rage, he grabbed hold of the stick, threw it on the floor of the cabin of the carriage, and sat forward to pout. He was not happy. He was angry and saddened. What surely would he tell Jorgen's parents? What would he tell his father? Nothing, he thought. He could not reveal that he had gone to the forest, not to anyone, nor the reason as to why, nor his suspicion, largely based on a gut feeling that he'd had, of gut feeling that appeared to have been incorrect. He shook his head and buried his face in his hands. Why had he been this stupid? How had he been this stupid? If he would have known, but no. There was little time for regret, as when he arrived home, of course, waiting for him there would be his father, who perhaps might have wondered where he'd been the entire day. Most of it had taken the ride to arrive at the western forest, and the rest, well, chaos and darkness and death. Jorgen's death, possibly Grandon's even. He cursed himself, but to no avail and to no point. "Damn this day," Refo said, shakily, revealing his face and placing his palm squarely upon his pant legs. "There are 2 dead now, and not 1.